What would you do if a mysterious woman collapsed in your arms only for the world to find out she was one of the richest heirs in America and she was hiding in your home? The wind had a bite that morning, the kind that slid past collars and cut straight to the bone. Snow drifted lazily at first, but by the time Jack Callahan reached the grocery store parking lot, it had started falling in thick, determined waves. The kind of snow that buried things, sidewalks, cars, and sometimes people's plans. Jack tightened his grip on the paper grocery bags, shoulders hunched against the cold. Beside him, his 7-year-old daughter Sophie trudged through the slush, her knit hat slipping over her eyebrows, one mitten dangling by a thread. "Daddy, are we almost there?" she asked, her voice muffled by her scarf. "Almost, sweetheart. Just need to load the trunk, then we'll blast the heat, promise." They hadn't meant to be out this long, just milk, eggs, and the peanut butter cereal Sophie loved. But the sale had been too good to pass up, and now Jack was juggling 5 heavy bags and a growing ache in his knees. The parking lot stretched out in front of them like a frozen desert, their beat-up sedan parked all the way near the back, beyond the last lamppost. He popped the trunk and began loading the bags. Sophie hopped in place to stay warm, her breath puffing clouds into the icy air. Then she tugged at his coat sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, pointing across the lot. "Why is that lady crying?" Jack looked up. At first, he didn't see her, just the return carts, half buried in snow. But then he spotted the figure hunched on the concrete curb, back turned to them, arms wrapped tightly around a crumpled paper bag. Her coat was too thin, her hair half tangled by the wind. Her shoulders trembled not from cold, Jack realized, but from something deeper. Grief, maybe. Or fear. He glanced at Sophie. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were confused, as if wondering why no one had helped her yet. Jack sighed, closed the trunk, and ruffled Sophie's hat. "Get in the car and stay warm. I'll be right back." He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. His boots crunched over salted ice, the sound loud in the otherwise hushed parking lot. "Mom," he said gently. The woman jumped slightly, wiping her eyes with her sleeve and sitting up straighter. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. Jack didn't argue. He recognized the tone. He'd used it himself more than once. He shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. "Doesn't sound like it," he said, "and that coat of yours isn't fooling anyone." She looked up then. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but striking green and sharp, like sea glass. There was something in them he couldn't quite place. Not just sadness, but something older. Kind of tired that went beyond the night before. "Thank you," she said softly, fingers gripping the coat like it might disappear. Jack didn't press. He sat down on the curb beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You don't look like you belong out here," he said after a pause. The woman gave a bitter half laugh. "There a dress code for emotional breakdowns in a snowstorm?" Jack smiled faintly. "Just tends to draw attention when you're crying next to the return carts at 9 in the morning." She exhaled, the sound shaky. "I just needed a minute. That's all." He nodded. Sometimes a minute turns into too long. They sat in silence for a while, the snow piling around them. Jack could feel the cold seeping through his flannel shirt, but he didn't move. From the car, Sophie pressed her face to the window, watching them with wide, worried eyes. "You got a place to go?" Jack asked eventually. The woman hesitated. "I have a cabin. Not far." "Cabin have heat?" "There's a fireplace." "I'll manage." Jack studied her face. She looked like someone trying very hard to hold herself together with paper and string. "Well," he said slowly, "I could drive you." "No pressure. Just warmer than here." She turned to look at him fully this time. For a moment, she seemed to be weighing the risk. Then she nodded. "Maybe just 5 minutes." Jack stood and offered his hand. She took it cautiously, her fingers ice cold against his.
He helped her up, and together they walked to the car. Sophie watched quietly from the back seat as the woman climbed in beside Jack, still wrapped in his coat. "Hi," the little girl said simply. The woman managed a small smile. "Hi." As Jack pulled out of the lot, the heater humming and the snow falling harder, he glanced sideways. "I'm Jack." "That's Sophie." The woman stared ahead, eyes following the swirling snow. "I'm Ava," she said after a long moment. "Just Ava." Jack nodded, not pushing further. But deep down, something told him this wasn't the last time he'd see her name, or feel the storm she carried with her. The road out of town narrowed quickly, the snow turning it into a winding path between sleeping trees and sloping hills. Jack's truck rumbled forward slowly, the wipers struggling against the building flurries. In the passenger seat, Ava sat quiet, eyes trained on the falling snow as if trying to remember something she'd long forgotten. Sophie hummed softly in the back seat, her small boots swinging back and forth as she stared out the foggy window. "This road always get plowed this late?" Jack asked, partly to make conversation, partly because he was starting to wonder if they'd get stuck. Ava blinked, as if pulled out of a fog. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't been back here in years." Jack glanced at her. "You said there's a cabin?" She nodded, pointing ahead. "Left at the old wooden sign if it's still standing." Jack found the sign, barely visible under a crust of ice and snow. He turned, tires crunching on the narrow trail that wound into a cluster of bare trees. It was quiet back there, the kind of quiet that carried weight, like the woods had paused to listen. When the clearing opened, Jack saw it, a small weathered cabin leaning slightly to one side, no smoke from the chimney. No footprints in the snow. The shutters were crooked and one window was taped over with plastic. "This it?" he asked. Ava gave a soft nod. "It was my dad's. He used to come here to get away from, well, everything." Jack pulled up close, put the truck in park, and left the engine running. "You sure it's safe?" he asked, not accusing, just concerned. "There's a fireplace," she said quietly. "I brought wood last week." Jack didn't get out right away. He looked at the cabin, then at her. She looked exhausted, not just from the weather, but from whatever she was carrying behind her eyes. "You want help getting settled?" he asked. She shook her head, her voice tight. "No, you've already done enough." Jack hesitated. "I can check in tomorrow, just in case." Ava glanced at him, then away. "Thank you," she said softly, reaching for the door handle. Before she stepped out, Sophie leaned forward from the back seat. "Wait!" Ava turned. Sophie held out something small, her red lollipop slightly linty, from her coat pocket. "You look like you need something sweet." Ava stared at the little hand. For a second, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she took the candy, her fingers brushing Sophie's. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack watched her step out into the snow, his coat still wrapped around her shoulders. She walked up the crooked porch steps, pulled out a key, and opened the door without looking back. It closed behind her with a soft click. Jack sat there for a moment longer, engine idling, heater blowing warm air into a space that suddenly felt cold again. He looked at Sophie in the rearview mirror. "You okay?" he asked. Sophie nodded. "She's sad." "Yeah," Jack said. "She is." They drove away in silence, the cabin shrinking behind them, swallowed by snow and trees and something else, something unspoken. Inside the cabin, Ava locked the door and stood in the dim light, letting the silence close in around her. It was colder than she remembered. The firewood was still there by the hearth, stacked neatly, untouched. Her fingers shook as she lit a match and held it to the kindling. The flame took slowly, then caught, spreading a faint glow that danced against the old stone walls. She wrapped Jack's coat tighter around herself, sat cross-legged on the floor, and exhaled slowly. There was only one bag beside the door. Inside, a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter,
and a cracked phone with a dead battery. That was all she'd taken when she left. She hadn't planned to stay long, hadn't planned to see anyone. But the snow came, and then Jack, and now here she was, sitting on a cold cabin floor with a little girl's lollipop in her palm like it was the most valuable thing she owned. She turned it in her fingers, the red wrapper crinkling softly. It was the first uncalculated act of kindness she'd felt in months, maybe years. Her eyes drifted to the fireplace, where the flames danced and flickered and tried their best to make her feel something like safe. She hadn't told Jack the full truth. Not even close. She didn't just come here to be alone, she came here to disappear. That night, the temperature dropped hard. The pipes froze sometime after midnight with a groaning crack that echoed through the cabin like a warning. Ava wrapped herself in every layer she had, sweaters, scarves, Jack's coat, and still, her fingers went numb. She curled beside the fireplace, watching the flames shrink, her breath puffed in faint white clouds, her phone still dead. The storm outside louder now, wind scraping the windows like it was searching for a way in. She picked up an old photo from the side pocket of her bag. Her and her father standing outside this same cabin years ago. His arm around her shoulder, her cheeks pink with laughter. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered to the picture. And for the first time in a long time, Ava Carter cried without holding back. By midnight, the cabin had turned into an icebox. The fire was down to faint orange embers. The kindling had burned too fast, and the logs Ava had left near the hearth were damp. Each time she tried to stoke the flames, smoke choked up the flue and bit at her eyes. She coughed, blinking through the haze, her fingers numb as she tried again and failed to get the fire roaring. The wind howled louder now, pushing against the cabin walls, slipping in through the cracks like it belonged there. It sounded like a warning, or maybe a memory. Ava sat on the floor, hugging Jack's coat tight around her shoulders, layers of sweaters and scarves clinging to her like armor made from desperation. Her toes ached. Her breath came in shallow clouds. The grocery bag she'd carried like a lifeline now sat forgotten by the door. She looked at her phone again. The battery icon blinked red when she plugged it into the portable charger, but there was no signal. Nothing but the mocking glow of no service stamped across the screen. It wasn't just the cold anymore. It was the silence. The way it crept in, slow and sharp, curling around her like a second skin. And that silence, more than the wind, more than the frost, made her feel like she was disappearing. She sat still for a long time. Then finally her pride cracked. With trembling hands she scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she didn't save but knew by heart. Jack Callahan. She hesitated. Her thumb hovered over the green button, then she pressed it. The phone rang once. "Hello?" Jack's voice was groggy, but awake. Ava closed her eyes. "It's me," she whispered. There was a pause, not long, just long enough to feel real. "Ava, are you okay?" She glanced around the cabin, the flickering candles, the frozen sink, the frost blooming on the inside of the windows. "No," she said quietly. "I need help." 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the snow, lighting up the clearing like a small miracle. Ava stood by the door, arms wrapped around herself, the phone pressed to her chest like a prayer. When the knock came, she opened the door before he could even call her name. Jack stood there, snow clinging to his coat, breath clouding in the air, holding a flashlight and a thick wool blanket. "Couch offer still good?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He gave her a gentle smile. "Always was." She didn't cry, not this time. She just stepped forward and let him wrap the blanket around her, the way you might wrap something breakable before taking it home. Jack's house wasn't fancy, it wasn't big, but when Ava stepped through the door, the warmth hit her like sunlight after a long winter. The scent of cinnamon toast and motor oil clung to the walls. A few toys littered the hallway, The hum of the old heater echoed softly through the vents. She stood still, letting the warmth reach her bones. Jack set her bag down by the couch, then turned on the lamp in the corner. "You hungry?" She shook her head.
Tired? She nodded. Jack pointed to the pull-out couch, already set up with clean sheets and an extra quilt folded at the foot. "Make yourself at home." Ava turned to him, her voice thick with something she hadn't felt in weeks. "I don't know how to say thank you without it sounding small." "You don't have to," he said. "Just rest." She crawled into the couch bed, the blanket soft and heavy over her legs, Jack's coat still clutched in her arms. The heater hissed gently. Somewhere down the hall, Sophie snored softly. Ava closed her eyes, and for the first time since she'd left everything behind, she felt warm. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting a golden stripe across the hardwood floor. Ava stirred slowly, blinking into the light. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the picture on the wall, Jack and Sophie, laughing at some roadside fair. Sophie had cotton candy on her nose. Jack's arm wrapped around her, both of them mid-laugh. "Not posed, not perfect, just real." Ava sat up slowly. Her muscles ached from the night on the floor of the cabin, but her heart felt strangely still, like someone had turned the volume down on the chaos inside her. She found Jack in the kitchen, barefoot in flannel pajama pants, flipping pancakes in a skillet that looked older than the house. He looked up and smiled. "Coffee's on," he said. "Sophie's still asleep. She'll probably try to convince you to eat her pancake sandwich later. Just say no." Ava smiled, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. "You really didn't have to come out in that storm," she said softly. Jack shrugged. "You called." She nodded. "I didn't think I would. But you did." That was enough. They sat down at the small kitchen table, mismatched mugs in hand, his with black coffee, hers with warm cocoa and too much sugar. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It just was. "I didn't come here to be saved," Ava said suddenly, eyes focused on the rim of her mug. Jack didn't flinch. "I know." She looked at him then, eyes tired but steady. "I just needed to be nowhere, to not be anyone." He nodded slowly. "You needed to be seen, not recognized." Ava blinked, caught off guard. Then quietly she said, "Exactly." He didn't ask for details. He didn't press. He just got up, grabbed the syrup, and slid the plate of pancakes her way. "Then let's start there." The next few days passed like a quiet snowfall, soft, steady, and unexpectedly beautiful. Ava hadn't planned to stay more than one night, maybe two, tops. But then came the second snowstorm, the frozen pipes at the cabin, and Sophie's innocent invitation. "You can stay until your toes stop being cold." So she did. It wasn't grand or dramatic. There was no speech, no agreement, no decision made aloud. She simply unpacked her bag into a small drawer Jack cleared in the hallway dresser. Her toothbrush found a home beside Sophie's, her jacket hung next to Jack's in the entryway, and slowly, almost without noticing, Ava began to settle. Not as a guest, as someone who was allowed to stay. The rhythms of the house were simple but grounding. In the morning, Jack made breakfast eggs on weekdays, pancakes on Sundays, and the occasional burnt toast when he got distracted. Sophie sat at the kitchen table with a crayon in one hand and a spoon in the other, narrating stories about school, squirrels, and her dreams of becoming either a veterinarian or a space explorer. Ava, at first, just watched, observed the flow of this quiet life like someone visiting a world not her own. But by the end of the week, she was helping slice apples for Sophie's lunchbox, folding laundry with Jack on the couch while a sitcom played quietly in the background, and reading bedtime stories in a voice still rusty but getting steadier. Her favorite moment each day came at night. Sophie would climb onto the pull-out couch where Ava slept, curl under the blanket with her for a few minutes, and whisper, "What should we dream about tonight?" Ava would smile and answer, "Something warm," and Sophie would nod like that was enough. It wasn't all perfect. One morning, Ava nearly broke down trying to figure out the old coffee machine, and Jack walked in to find her blinking back tears over a jammed filter. She laughed it off. "It's not the coffee," she muttered. "I know," Jack replied, handing her a fresh cup from the one in the garage. "It's never just the coffee." Another time, she offered to help at the garage, wanting anything to keep her hands busy. Jack looked surprised but didn't question it. He handed her a box of mismatched tools and told her to sort them. She did, with a focus that made her shoulders ache and her mind go blissfully quiet. Jack had a way of knowing when to talk and when to leave space. He never pushed, never asked why she flinched at loud knocks or checked her phone in the middle of the night with a flicker of fear in her eyes. He just made sure the porch light was always on when she came home from a walk, and that the hot cocoa was still warm if she didn't want to talk yet. One afternoon, Sophie came home from school clutching a drawing in crayon-stained fingers. "Close your eyes," she told Ava. Ava obeyed, heart skipping for reasons she couldn't explain. "Okay, open." The picture was uneven, bright, and wildly imaginative. 3 stick figures stood in front of a crooked little house. One tall man with dark hair labeled Dad, one small girl with pigtails labeled Me, and one woman, slightly taller than the girl, with long hair and a red heart drawn on her shirt. Labeled, "Our New Family." Ava's throat closed. She looked up at Sophie, who beamed with pride. "You're in the middle," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "Because that's where love goes." Ava couldn't speak. She just pulled the little girl into her arms and held her tight, the crayon drawing still trembling in her hand. Later that evening, Ava sat on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, the sky above just beginning to dim into lavender twilight. Jack stepped outside, 2 mugs in hand. "She give you the family drawing?" he asked, settling beside her. "She did," Ava said, voice barely above a whisper. "She made one with just the 2 of us after Rachel died," Jack said quietly. "I hung it on the fridge for almost a year. Then one day, she added a 3rd figure in pencil and said, 'We're ready for someone new.'" Ava glanced at him, surprised. "You never told me that." He shrugged. "Didn't think I needed to. She already did." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping quietly, the cold air kissing their cheeks. Then Ava said, "I don't know what this is yet, or what it means." Jack didn't look away. "You don't have to. I might not stay long." He nodded. "You don't have to do that either." She looked down at the crayon drawing in her lap. "But I want to. At least, for now." And Jack smiled, not big, not eager, just steady. "Then for now," he said, "you're exactly where you belong." That night, Ava tucked Sophie into bed and lingered a little longer at the doorway. Sophie had already drifted off, her small hand resting over the corner of the drawing she now kept on her nightstand. Ava stepped back into the living room, the hum of the heater lulling the house into a comfortable hush. She wasn't sure what tomorrow held, but tonight she wasn't running, she was resting. And for someone who had once built walls of glass and steel, this little wooden house filled with creaky floors and mismatched socks felt more like home than any place she'd ever known. The day started like any other. Sophie was at the kitchen table coloring while Ava stirred pancake batter, trying not to burn the edges the way Jack sometimes did. Jack was fixing a leaky pipe in the bathroom, humming something old and off-key. The house smelled like maple syrup and warm cinnamon. It was ordinary. And for Ava, ordinary had become precious. She was just flipping the second pancake when she heard Sophie's voice from the living room. "Daddy." "Come quick, she's on TV." Ava froze, spatula mid-air. Jack stepped out, hands still damp from the sink. Who's on TV, baby? Sophie pointed to the screen. Miss Ava. Ava's stomach dropped. There it was, her face.
Not as she looked now, with Jack's flannel shirt hanging loosely from her frame and her hair in a messy bun, but polished, controlled. The way she used to look when her life wasn't really hers. The photo was from a press conference over a year ago, when she stood beside a podium with a tired smile and too many people pulling strings behind her. Beneath the image, bold letters ran across the screen. Avia Carter, Hotel Heiress, still missing. Family seeks answers. Jack's hand went to the remote. He turned up the volume. Daughter of late hotel magnate Robert Carter has been missing for several weeks. Friends and legal representatives are urging her to make contact. While no foul play is suspected, speculation continues surrounding her disappearance and the future of the Carter estate. Ava couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Jack muted the TV. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything she'd felt since stepping into his home. He turned to her slowly. Is it true? Ava didn't speak right away. She just nodded, once. Jack sat down at the table, as if the weight of everything had suddenly caught up to him. Sophie looked between them, confused. Miss Ava, you're a princess? Ava almost laughed. But it came out like a cough. No, sweetheart, she said softly, kneeling next to her. I'm just someone who forgot who she was for a while. Jack was still staring at her. Not angry, not yet, just stunned. You didn't trust me enough to tell me? He asked quietly. Ava looked down. I didn't trust myself, she admitted. When I left, I didn't know who I could count on. Everyone around me wanted something: money, control, my name on a deal I didn't believe in. My father had barely been gone a month, and they were already carving up what he built. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. I didn't run away to hide from the world. I ran to find out if I could live without it. And then I met you. And Sophie. And suddenly, it mattered again. Jack didn't say anything. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, breathing slow and deep. Ava looked at him, her voice softer now. I didn't tell you because I didn't want this. She gestured to the kitchen, to the house, to turn into something else. I just wanted to be seen. Not as Carter Hotels, not as the headline, just Ava. Jack stood slowly. You should have told me, he said. I know. I would have understood. Ava nodded, tears stinging at the corner of her eyes. Sophie climbed into her lap, wrapping her arms around Ava's neck without saying a word. Jack stared at them both for a long moment, then picked up his keys from the counter. I need to clear my head, he said, and then he walked out the door. That evening, the house felt different. The lights still worked, the heater still hummed. The pancakes were still sitting on the counter, uneaten. But the warmth was gone. Ava sat on the couch, Sophie curled up against her, fast asleep with her thumb tucked under her chin. She watched the front door, wondering if it would open, wondering if she deserved for it to. Hours later, Jack returned. His boots stomped snow onto the mat, his coat dusted with frost. He looked tired, not physically, but soul-tired the way someone looks when they've been walking through thoughts they never expected to confront. Ava stood. I'm sorry, she said before he could speak. I never meant to lie. He looked at her. You didn't lie, he said. You just didn't tell the whole truth. That's worse. Jack stepped closer, then paused. Why'd you come here? Really? Ava hesitated, then, quietly, because this was the only place left that didn't expect anything from me. Jack nodded slowly. Then why stay? She looked toward the hallway where Sophie's drawings still decorated the wall. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't have to pretend. Jack walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, then leaned against the counter. I'm not mad, he said after a long pause.
I just don't want to be part of someone's escape plan. You're not, Ava said, stepping closer. You're the reason I'm not running anymore. Jack looked at her. I don't need your money. I don't care about your name. But I do care that you trust me. And if you want to build something real here, we build it with the truth. Ava nodded, voice low. Then let's start from the beginning. They stood in the middle of the kitchen, the space between them finally beginning to close. And though nothing had been fixed completely, something had shifted. This was no longer a shelter. It was becoming a home. The snow had stopped falling by morning. The sky was a soft grey, the kind that made the world feel suspended in time. Jack stood on the back porch with a steaming mug of coffee, watching smoke curl from the chimney. He didn't hear Ava step out until she was beside him, wrapped in one of his old flannel jackets. He didn't move away. She held her own mug in both hands, breathing in the warmth before speaking. I thought once I left, it would all go quiet, she said. No more noise, no more pressure. Just space. Jack glanced at her. Did it work? Ava shook her head, a sad smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. No. Turns out, it wasn't the city or the press or the boardroom noise that was loudest. It was me. He let that settle between them, letting the quiet stretch just long enough before asking, What were you running from? She took a breath. Grief, mostly. Guilt. My dad died, and suddenly I was expected to become a version of him I never asked to be. People didn't care who I was, they just saw what I inherited. Lawyers, executives, even so-called friends. They wanted to shape me into something they could use. Jack didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, as if the words didn't surprise him. I tried to keep up for a while, Ava continued. Board meetings, charity galas, making decisions I wasn't ready to make. But it wasn't just the pressure. It was the fact that no one stopped to ask me if I was okay. They assumed I'd be strong, because I had money. Because I had a name. She turned toward him now. But I wasn't strong. I was breaking. Jack looked at her then, really looked. And when he spoke, his voice was softer than she expected. I know that feeling. Ava raised an eyebrow. You? He chuckled dryly. You think people can't fall apart in small towns? She didn't respond, just waited. Jack leaned on the porch rail, his eyes on the snow-covered yard. Rachel, me wife, got sick fast. 1 minute she was helping Sophie pick out dresses for her preschool photo day, and the next she was in the hospital. The cancer came hard, and by the time we caught it, it was already winning. Ava's heart tightened. I kept working, he said. Fixed cars during the day, read hospital pamphlets at night, told Sophie everything was going to be okay, even when I knew it wasn't. He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. After Rachel passed, I didn't cry for 3 months, not once. Everyone kept saying how strong I was, how well I was handling it. But what they meant was, I didn't make them uncomfortable. Ava reached out, placed her hand gently on his arm. I'm sorry, she whispered. Jack looked at her, eyes heavy with something deeper than sadness, something like understanding. Losing her broke me in ways I didn't know I could break, he said. And then one day, I looked at Sophie and realized she was watching, learning. I didn't want her growing up thinking love had to mean silence. Ava nodded, her voice low. So you started talking again. And listening, Jack said, especially when it hurt. They stood like that for a while, two people no longer strangers, no longer pretending. Just two souls worn down by different battles, but somehow finding peace on the same porch. Later that afternoon, while Sophie was at a friend's birthday party, Ava helped Jack in the garage. The space smelled like oil and old pine wood. Tools hung on pegboards, dusty blueprints curled in corners. Jack was working on an old motorcycle,
that hadn't run since the summer before Rachel got sick. "You ever think about leaving this town?" Ava asked, as she wiped grease from a wrench.
"Sometimes," Jack said. "But then I remember it's not where you live. It's who you come home to." She looked at him. "You ever think about letting someone new in?" Jack smiled faintly.
"Every day since you made cocoa in my kitchen and didn't burn it." Ava laughed. It felt good, real. That evening, Ava pulled a box down from the top of the hallway closet. Inside were things she hadn't touched since she left the city: documents, business cards, the letter her lawyer had sent begging her to return and reassume her responsibilities. Jack sat on the floor across from her, Sophie asleep down the hall. "You thinking of going back?" he asked gently. Ava looked at the papers, then at him. "No, not in the way they want." He nodded, waiting. "I'm not running anymore," she said, "but maybe I don't have to erase who I was to be who I am now." Jack's eyes didn't leave hers. "You don't." She closed the box, set it aside. "Then maybe it's time I stop hiding." Outside, the sky had gone dark. Snow glimmered under the porch light, and from inside, the sound of the old heater kicking in filled the silence like a heartbeat. Ava rested her head on Jack's shoulder. "We both lost something," she said quietly. "But maybe," he replied, "we're finding something too." And for the first time in a long, long time, neither of them felt alone. It was a Tuesday morning when the past caught up to Ava Carter. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of wet earth and slush-slick pavement. Sophie was at school. Jack was in the garage working on an old Chevy. And Ava was in the kitchen, flipping through a worn notebook of Sophie's doodles when the knock came. Not the soft kind, not the kind neighbors used. 3 sharp raps, authoritative, cold. She froze. Jack called from the garage, "Can you grab that?" Ava hesitated. Her fingers tightened on the notebook. She opened the door, and there he was, black wool coat, leather gloves, briefcase in hand. Wallace, her father's longtime attorney. The man who'd been at her side during the funeral. The man who, 2 months later, signed documents she refused to read and told her she was expected to carry the Carter name with poise. "Miss Carter," he said flatly. "We've been looking for you." Ava's voice barely left her throat. "I know." Jack stepped onto the porch behind her, wiping his hands with a rag. He glanced at Wallace, then at Ava. "You know him?" Ava nodded. "Jack, this is Wallace. He worked with my father." Wallace barely acknowledged Jack. He stepped forward, holding out a manila envelope like a blade. "This is a formal summons. You've missed multiple shareholder meetings. Legal action is now pending regarding your withdrawal from the family trust and business obligations. Your silence is no longer an option." Ava didn't reach for the envelope. Instead, she straightened. "No one told me I had a choice before, Wallace. That's the difference now." Wallace's jaw tightened. "Miss Carter." "No," she cut in. "You don't get to show up here and act like I'm a problem to be handled. I'm not a line item. I'm not a press release. I'm a person." Jack stepped beside her. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His presence was enough. Solid, protective, grounding. Wallace's eyes flicked between them. "You're hiding here?" "I'm living here," she said firmly, "and I'm not coming back to be your puppet." He exhaled sharply through his nose. "Then we'll proceed accordingly. You'll be hearing from the board." "You already did," she said. "I heard them loud and clear." "That's why I left." Without another word, Wallace tucked the envelope into the mailbox, turned, and walked briskly toward a sleek black car parked at the curb. Tires crunched over wet gravel as it pulled away. Ava stood frozen on the porch, her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. Jack turned to her. "You okay?" She looked at him, her mouth tight, her chest tight. "I don't know,"
Inside, she sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the envelope now resting on the coffee table. Jack stood nearby, arms crossed, silent. "You don't have to open it," he said gently. "I do," she whispered. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unsealed the flap. Inside were neatly printed documents, legal threats, meeting minutes, language full of cold professionalism that masked real power moves, a warning more than a request. They were coming for her, or at least for her name. Jack watched her eyes scan the page. "They want you back." "No," Ava said bitterly. "They want what I represent, what they think they can control." She stood and paced the room, her breath coming faster now. "They don't care what my father actually stood for. They just want the brand, the image. A Carter on the letterhead." Jack stepped closer. "You don't owe them anything." Ava looked at him, her voice cracking. "It's not that simple." He didn't flinch. "Then explain it to me." She sank into the chair again. "My father worked his whole life building something that mattered to him, at least. Not just money. He cared about legacy, about integrity, but the people around him, they twisted that. And when he died, they expected me to carry on what he started. But not in the way he wanted," Jack said. "No, they made it clear. Smile for the cameras, sign what they tell me to sign, and don't ask questions." Her voice dropped. "When I left, they called it a meltdown, a liability." Jack kneeled beside her, his hand resting gently over hers. "Do you want to go back?" Ava shook her head. "I want to build something new, from scratch, on my terms." Jack smiled softly. "Then you're not running anymore." She met his eyes, and for the first time that day, she nodded with certainty. "No, I'm fighting." That night, after Sophie was asleep and the house had gone quiet, Ava opened her laptop. She created a new folder, Carter Foundation Reimagined. Then she began to type. Not a resignation. Not a surrender, a vision. What if the Carter legacy wasn't about hotels and quarterly earnings? What if it became about safe spaces, real healing and second chances? She drafted ideas for shelters, mental health programs, career transition grants for single parents and survivors. She worked until past midnight, and when she finally closed the laptop, she didn't feel afraid anymore. The next morning, Jack poured her coffee before she even asked. She took the mug with a smile and said, "We need to talk about a few things, like lawyers and media." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you want to open that door?" She looked out the window where Sophie was playing in the snow, building a lopsided snowman. "I didn't come here to disappear," she said. "I came here to find out who I was without the noise." Jack nodded. "And who are you now?" Ava smiled. "I'm still figuring that out. But I know this, I'm not hiding anymore." He clinked his mug gently against hers. To not hiding. It started with a photo. Just a blurry shot snapped by a passerby outside the local hardware store. Jack loading a box of supplies into his truck, Ava laughing beside him, bundled in one of his old coats, her hand resting lightly on his arm. It hit the internet 2 days later. At first, it was a whisper on a small-town Facebook group. Then, a Reddit post. Missing heiress Ava Carter, spotted in rural Montana. By day 3, the fire had spread. News vans rolled into town. Paparazzi followed, hiding behind snowbanks and mailboxes. Headlines exploded online. Ava Carter found hiding out with single father in the woods. Carter Heiress in disguise, romance or rebellion. From penthouse to pickup trucks, inside Ava Carter's disappearance. Ava stood in the living room, phone buzzing in her hand as article after article poured in. Her face stared back at her from the screen, smiling, vulnerable, exposed. Jack stood beside her, quiet. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, building a puzzle, unaware of the digital storm swirling around them. I thought we had more time, Ava whispered. Jack exhaled slowly. We knew this might happen. She looked at him, eyes wide with worry. But not like this. Not with cameras in our yard. Not with my life turned into a spectacle again. He placed a hand on her back. Then we take control of the story. The next day, Ava met with Grace Martinez, a local journalist with a small but respected regional paper. Grace had once interviewed Jack years ago after he'd donated engine repair to the local high school's robotics team. She wasn't flashy, but she was fair. They sat in the corner booth of the town's quiet cafe, the blinds drawn. No PR handlers, Ava said. No scripts. Grace opened her notebook. Just the truth. Ava nodded. For once. She told her everything. Not the polished version. Not the sanitized press release. The real story. Her father's death. The corporate manipulation. The pressure to be perfect. The breaking point. And the moment she met a little girl with a red lollipop who reminded her what kindness looked like. When she finished, Grace closed the notebook and said softly, "People need to hear this." "I'm not looking for sympathy," Ava replied. "No," Grace said. "You're offering something better. Honesty." 2 days later, the article went live. The woman behind the name, Ava Carter, speaks out. It wasn't viral clickbait. It didn't shout in all caps. It simply told the story of grief, escape, healing, and a second chance in a town that never asked for her name. And it changed everything. At the grocery store, the cashier smiled and said, "I read what you shared. My sister went through something like that. Thanks for saying it out loud." The school librarian, Mrs. Keene, handed Ava a worn copy of Jane Eyre with a knowing look and said, "You remind me of her, strong in the quiet ways." Even Mr. Holtz, the grumpy mechanic who never said more than 3 words, nodded and offered, "Good piece." Real stuff. But not everyone was kind. A black SUV rolled slowly past the garage, its tinted window lowering just enough for someone to snap a photo. A tabloid headline surfaced later. "Carter Heiress playing house with grease-stained mechanic?" Jack tossed the paper in the trash. Ava laughed. "At least they didn't call you blue-collar eye candy." Jack raised an eyebrow. "They better not." But behind the jokes, both of them knew things were shifting. The peaceful bubble they'd built was thinning. Then came the letter. Delivered by courier, official crest on the seal. An invitation, no. A demand for Ava to attend the upcoming Carter Foundation Gala in New York City. Public appearance required. Press expected. Reinstatement discussions to follow. She stared at it for a long time. Jack stood behind her, arms crossed. "You don't have to go," he said. "But maybe I should," she replied. He was quiet. "I left because I couldn't breathe," she said. "But now I know who I am. Maybe it's time they see that too." Jack nodded slowly. "Then we go on your terms." They drove to the airport the next week. Sophie stayed with Jack's sister, a few towns over. Ava wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry, no designer heels, just herself. The city skyline greeted them like an old ghost. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered and cameras flashed. But Ava walked in like she belonged. Not because she'd come back to take her place, but because she'd built her own. The board tried to corner her with legal jargon and PR angles. She cut them off with a speech. Short, unscripted, honest. She told the room she hadn't vanished, she'd healed. She told them the Carter name should stand for more than money, and that she wouldn't be a figurehead, but a force. The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. And for the first time in years, she stepped off a stage not as a puppet, but as a woman with her own voice. That night, in the quiet of their hotel room, Ava curled up beside Jack and whispered, "Do you think we can go back to normal?" Jack smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Normal's overrated." She laughed. "Then let's build something better." He kissed her forehead. "We already are." The snow had melted by the time Jack and Ava returned home. Spring hadn't fully arrived, but the air was softer, the sun warmer. Sophie ran out to meet them as their truck pulled into the driveway, her arms flung wide and her pigtails bouncing. "Mommy Ava!" She said it without thinking. Ava froze mid-step. Jack's heart skipped, watching the word float in the air between them. Sophie didn't even blink. She just wrapped her arms around Ava's waist and leaned in like she'd always belonged there. Ava knelt down slowly, pulling her close. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Inside, everything was as they left it. The half-finished puzzle, Jack's wrench set by the door, Ava's notebook still open on the kitchen table. But something was different too. She wasn't hiding anymore. And Jack, he wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. They had made it through the storm. Now came the harder question. What next? Later that night, after Sophie had fallen asleep between them while watching a movie, Ava leaned back against the couch and sighed. "They offered me a seat on the foundation board," she said. Jack didn't look surprised. "Let me guess, public-facing. Lots of smiling, fancy speeches?" Ava chuckled. "Exactly. Are you going to take it?" She didn't answer right away. "I don't know," she said finally. "For the first time, I feel like I have choices. But every one of them pulls me in a different direction." Jack reached over, took her hand. "Then maybe the answer isn't about choosing between this life and that one." She raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if you didn't have to leave behind the woman you've become just to honor who you were?" Ava considered that. "I've always felt like I had to pick one version of myself," she said. "The public version or the private one." Jack smiled. "But maybe the strongest version is the one who stopped running." The next day, Ava visited the community center. It was a small, modest building with faded paint and donated furniture, but it pulsed with real-life teenagers working on college essays, single mums swapping childcare tips, seniors gathered around a card table laughing over bad coffee. She met with the director, Ms. Laverne, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who ran the place like a general with a heart of gold. "So you're the Carter girl," Laverne said, arms crossed. "You don't look like the tabloids say." Ava smiled. "That's kind of the point." They sat for 2 hours, talking through what the center needed. Not just money, but repairs, outreach, volunteers, mental health resources. By the end, Ava rolled up her sleeves and grabbed a paintbrush. No cameras. No press, just intention. Back home, Jack watched from the porch as Ava returned with paint on her jeans and a flyer for a local fundraiser. "I thought you were trying to step back from everything," he teased. "I'm not stepping back," she said, kissing his cheek. "I'm building something forward." They worked together to draft a proposal. A foundation not in her father's image, but in hers. Local, not corporate. Practical, not performative. They called it the Second Wind Projector Place for people rebuilding their lives after loss, hardship, or simply losing their way. Just like Ava had, just like Jack once did. In the evenings, they sat at the kitchen table planning. Sophie made them badges that said Boss Lady and Fix It Guy. They stuck them to the fridge. Then one day, Ava received a letter from the Carter board. It was brief, respectful, and unexpected. "We support your vision. We'd like to partner with your new initiative. On your terms." She read the letter twice. Jack looked over her shoulder. "That good or bad?" She smiled. "I think it means I don't have to fight anymore. Just lead." They held the first fundraiser at the community center on a sunny Saturday afternoon. There was a barbecue. Face painting. Sophie sold lemonade for 50 cents a cup. Jack grilled hot dogs. Ava gave a short speech, no script, just heart. She spoke about second chances, about finding peace not in leaving your past behind, but in finally claiming it as your own. People clapped, people cried. And that night, As they cleaned up, Mrs. Laverne hugged her and said, "You're one of us now, not because of your name, but because you showed up." Later, as they tucked Sophie into bed, the little girl yawned and asked, "Are we a real family now?" Jack and Ava looked at each other. Then they looked at her.
"You've always been my daughter," Jack said. "And now," Ava added softly, "you're mine too." Sophie beamed, eyes closing as sleep pulled her under. Jack pulled Ava into his arms. "You sure you're not going to wake up and regret all this?" She shook her head against his chest. "I've lived the life everyone else wanted for me. Now, I'm finally choosing mine." He kissed her hair, held her closer. "And I'm choosing it with you." There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no podium, no red carpet, no press. Just a crisp spring morning, a line of folding chairs in the sun, and a wooden sign hand-painted by Sophie that read, "The Second Wind Project, Grand Opening." Ava stood at the edge of the gravel lot, watching as neighbors gathered. Some carried folding chairs, others brought casseroles. A few just came with open hearts. Jack approached, holding a thermos and 2 mugs. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "More than I've ever been." He handed her the coffee. "It's the good stuff." "The strong kind." She smiled. "You always know what I need before I do." The building was small, but full of promise. Once an abandoned clinic, now reborn. Inside were donated bookshelves, reupholstered chairs, a counseling room painted sunflower yellow, and a community kitchen with a fridge that hummed proudly. There was a wall near the front door labeled "Stories of Renewal." Ava had written the first card and pinned it herself. "I didn't disappear. I came home to myself. And this time, I'm staying." Others followed. A single mom wrote about finding courage after divorce. A teenager pinned up a poem about surviving bullying. An elderly man thanked the town for letting him feel useful again. It wasn't a fancy foundation, but it was real. After the crowd settled, Ava stepped forward. No microphone. Just her voice. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I won't take much of your time, but I want to say something simple. I used to think I had to run away to find peace, that I had to leave behind who I was to become someone new." She paused, scanning the faces of people who had once seen her as a stranger. "But what I learned in this town, from this man," she glanced at Jack, "and this little girl who changed everything, is that peace isn't about escaping. It's about belonging." There was a hush, deep and warm. Ava smiled and stepped back. The applause wasn't roaring, but it was honest. That afternoon, Jack grilled on the porch while Sophie and her friends drew chalk butterflies on the driveway. Ava stood inside the kitchen, refilling lemonade pitchers. She paused for a moment, staring out the window. There was a time when this kind of day, this kind of life would have felt small to her, like something other people had, while she was busy living in headlines. Now, it felt like everything. After everyone had gone home, and Sophie was curled up on the couch with a comic book, Jack pulled Ava aside. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous," she teased. He grinned, but his tone turned serious. "We've built something good here, but there's one thing missing." She tilted her head. "What?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Ava froze. "Jack, I know we've already built a life. A home, a family," he said, "but I want to choose you every day. Not just in spirit, not just in the quiet ways." He opened the box. Inside was a ring symbol, timeless and unmistakably hers. "I want this to be official," he said. "Will you marry me?" She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, tears welling in her eyes, she whispered, "Yes. Yes, I will." The wedding was held 2 weeks later, not at a cathedral, not in a ballroom, but right in their backyard, under a canopy of fairy lights strung between trees. Sophie wore a flower crown and carried a ring tied to her favorite stuffed bunny. Jack wore a suit that still smelled faintly of engine grease. Ava walked barefoot down a short aisle, her dress fluttering like it had a soul of its own. Their vows were short. Real. Jack promised to never fix what wasn't broken. Ava promised to never run from who she was again. Sophie declared them officially our forever family, with a proud grin. And when they kissed, there were no cameras, only neighbors. Only joy, only home. That night, after the music faded and the fireflies blinked across the lawn, Jack and Ava lay in the hammock, arms tangled, silence between them rich with meaning. "You ever think," Ava murmured, "that the hardest thing you'll ever do is just stay?" Jack nodded. "And also, the most worth it." They watched the stars for a long while. Then Ava whispered, "I used to think love had to be loud. Grand, sweeping." Jack chuckled. "We're pretty quiet." "Exactly," she said, resting her head on his chest. "That's how I know it's real." Months passed. The foundation grew. Sophie started 3rd grade with a new lunchbox and a note from Mom and Dad tucked inside. People still whispered sometimes, still wondered what Ava Carter was doing here, but she didn't mind. Because she wasn't doing anything for show anymore, she was just living, fully, deeply, home for good. Sometimes healing doesn't come from running away. It comes from standing still long enough to truly be seen. Ava Carter spent her life surrounded by wealth, status, and expectations. But it wasn't until she walked away from all of it that she discovered something real. A quiet town, a kind man, and a little girl who didn't care about last names or headlines, only kindness. Jack Callahan didn't try to fix her. He simply made space for her to breathe, and in doing so, gave her the freedom to choose a life that felt like hers. This story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Often, it's found in small moments. Shared coffee on the porch, laughter in a cluttered kitchen, a child falling asleep between two people learning to trust again. For those of us who have lived long enough to carry both joy and regret, it's a powerful reminder. It's never too late to begin again. Not to chase what's loud or shiny, but to come home to a life where we're loved, not for what we offer, but for who we are. That kind of peace, it's worth everything.